Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Rita Koutsoudimos and I'm the Executive Director of the BC Alliance for Healthy Living. We're so pleased that you're joining us today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're here today on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, where we have the pleasure to work, live, and play. We are here today to discuss how physical activity is important at every stage of life, because how we move affects our well-being in multiple ways, and that is as true for our elders as it is for preschoolers. Being active is good for our brains, hearts, and bodies, but it also provides opportunities to connect with others in our community and helps us to feel strong and happy. We have an interesting program lined up for you today on the importance of physical activity across the lifespan, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you're having trouble hearing, try turning up the volume on your phone or computer. We really want to get your input today, so we'll be asking you to use the control panel on the right-hand corner of your screen. Type in your questions for our speakers as you think of them, and we'll have a question period after each set of speakers and a final round at the end of the presentations. We also want you to participate in some polls. We'll give you a heads up that the poll is coming, and you'll see a blue screen that has multiple choice questions. Please respond to the polls. You'll have a few seconds to do so, and then we'll publish the results for everyone to see. The polls provide us, our panelists, and you with instant feedback. Again, we really want to hear your questions and comments, so you can submit them at any time during a presentation by simply typing them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please indicate if there is someone in particular you're addressing it to. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for, and if we miss any of them, we'll send out a post-event email with missed Q's and A's. So now let me tell you about our program today. I'd like to start by talking about the Provincial Physical Activity Strategy. Active people, active places. The BC Physical Activity Strategy was designed to guide and stimulate coordinated policies, practices, and programs in physical activity to improve the health and well-being of British Columbians, both for individuals and the communities in which they live, learn, work, and play. The innovative and important programs that we'll hear about today fit within the framework for action and are supported through the Physical Activity Strategy. The framework for action, which we fondly refer to as the house, is our action plan and guide for creating resources and tools, leadership and instructional capacity, cross-sectoral partnerships, grants for community programming, and enhanced opportunities for participation. This was a major collaborative effort of over 30 key stakeholders who make up the Physical Activity Leadership Council and who represent communities, government, recreation, medical, and research sectors, as well as public health agencies and health promotion. The framework for action provides direction and a spark to ignite the creation of programming to change the landscape of physical activity and improve health outcomes in BC. You can see from this slide that there are 9 initiatives that make up the current activities in the Physical Activity Strategy. But today, we are highlighting 2 fantastic initiatives that have been designed to target the early years and older adults. Let's start with the early years. Today, 76% of preschoolers get too much screen time, and only 62% get the recommended level of activity for their age group. Appetite to Play aims to change that. It is an evidence-based program which sets the stage for lifelong healthy behaviors in children ages 0 to 5. Stepping to the other side of the age spectrum, we know that the main reason older adults lose their independence is from falling. One of the most important measures an older adult can take to prevent falls is to engage in physical activity. According to the 2016 census, right here in BC, we have the most municipalities with a high proportion of people aged 85 and older. We'll find out how the Active Aging Research Team designs the innovative program Choose to Move for older adults and how it is shifting the physical activity patterns as our population continues to age. We are delighted to have 4 speakers shine a light on the topic of physical activity across the lifespan to help us understand some of the issues and why they're important. Our first set of speakers, Jennifer Scar and Sana Faki, will give an overview of appetite to play. And then our second set of speakers will be Dr. Heather McKay and Krista Hoy, who will present an overview of Active Aging BC and its signature program, Choose to Move. They will highlight why these programs are important, how they're working, some of their challenges and successes, and point to opportunities to inform future policy. So that's an overview of the webinar, but before our first speaker gets started, we'd like to start with a question about you. We'll put this up as a poll and post the results. If you see that you fit into more than one category, then just choose the one that's the best fit for why you're joining today. So, which of these statements best describes your interest in the topic of today's webinar? A, I work in public health, whether you worked in research or policy related to physical activity, whether you're an early childhood educator or work in that field, I work with seniors and elders, or I'm interested in age-friendly communities and programs. Okay, so it looks like we've got a good, healthy cohort from the public health sector. We've also got some people that work in research and overall an interest in age-friendly communities. Well, I'm sure we have something for everyone. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Scar and Sana Faki. Jennifer Scar is the Provincial Director of Primary Care and Preventative Health with Child Health BC. In this role, she's focusing on provincial initiatives related to oral health, injury prevention, healthy weights, and child and youth health and well-being indicators. Sana Faki is the Provincial Lead of Early Years Health and Wellness at Child Health BC, where she leads health promotion and prevention initiatives for children aged 0 to 5. So I want to thank both of you for joining us today, and now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Scar, who will start us off.
Thanks, Rita. So, Brenda, just the next slide, please. So one of the things we wanted to mention before we begin is that the Appetite to Play initiative was developed in partnership. Previous slide. Okay. So the Appetite to Play initiative was developed in partnership with 4 main organizations: Child Health BC, the YMCA of Greater Vancouver, the Childhood of BC Foundation, and Sport for Life Society. Each of the organizations have come together to provide expertise in the areas of either child health, provincial training, food literacy and healthy eating, and physical activity and physical literacy. We are funded by the BC Ministry of Health through the BC Alliance for Healthy Living, and as Rita mentioned, we're doing this to support the BC Physical Activity Strategy. So in this strategy, it was identified that early years was a key focus area for action to increase healthy eating and physical activity for children ages 0 to 5 years. So really, we wouldn't be able to do any of this work without these key partnerships. Next slide, Brenda. As we all know, and as Rita mentioned, healthy eating and physical activity are essential to healthy child development. Research has shown that the early years, 0 to 5, is a critical time for establishing healthy behaviors and patterns that support physical, cognitive, emotional, and social development. These patterns will carry over into later childhood and support lifelong health and resilience. The 2 types of behaviors and patterns we are focusing on in Appetite to Play is healthy eating, developing food literacy, and physical activity or developing physical literacy. However, establishing these positive behaviors and patterns is not that easy due to the changing environment we live in. Next slide. So Rita talked a bit about this, but I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit more. So some key aspects of the changing environment include the following. 71% of 4 to 8-year-old children eat less than the recommended minimum number of servings of vegetables and fruit a day. 70% of 3 to 4-year-olds meet the daily recommendation of at least 180 minutes of physical activity. In childcare, young children are inactive for more than 3/4 of their childcare day. In 2014, Active Healthy Kids Canada reported that children 3 to 5 years old spend an average of 2 hours per day in front of screens. And only 15% of preschoolers meet current Canadian sedentary behavior guidelines for the early years, which is less than 1 hour per day. And we all know that marketing and advertising sets brand preference early in childhood. Next slide. Given this changing environment, Appetite to Play was created to build the capacity of early years providers to promote healthy eating and physical activity. Early years providers have an important role in creating environments that support food literacy and physical literacy in children 0 to 5 years old. As we mentioned, mostly because they spend a lot of time with this age population. The average child in childcare spends 7 hours a day in childcare, which is about 2/3 of their waking hours. Just wanted to note to the folks on the call that how we're defining early years providers are providers that work in daycare centers, family-based daycare centers, licensed or licensed not required, preschools, parent participation programs, or after-school daycare. So really anywhere, any setting where early years are, and they have providers that support them. Next slide. So before we continue on, we wanted to just do a couple of activities, and the first one focuses on food, and this is called the Virtual Mystery Food Bag. So Brenda's going to put up a poll. Have a look at the 3 pictures, and let us know if they are. Oh, can you get the pictures back up, Brenda? How about I read it out? Okay, so have a look at the pictures and let us know if they are A, pineapple, tomato, orange, B, lychee, bell pepper, grapefruit, or C, durian, tomato, orange. So, oh, I guess everyone knows that. Perfect. A little more about food literacy. It is the knowledge, attitudes, oh, next slide. Next slide, Brenda, there. Okay. A little more about food literacy. It is the knowledge, attitudes, and skills that people have about food. It helps us to form positive relationships with food. It provides us with an understanding of the importance of cultural and traditional foods. It helps us to understand that food is connected with mental health and overall well-being. And it supports us in knowing where our food comes from and how it's produced. And it also engages children about food using all 5 senses. So we're going to do another activity. So next slide, Brenda. So we're going to do a couple more activities. These ones focus on being active. So I'm just assuming that everyone can stand up wherever they are and do some of these activities. So can you grow up tall like a tree? Now sway in the wind. Sana's doing it here for me right now. Next slide, Brenda. Can you squat like a frog? Now jump up. Next slide. Can you balance on one leg like a flamingo? Now try the other leg. Okay, next slide. Thanks everyone for participating. So those are just some examples of activities that we do in our training and in some of the work that we do. So physical literacy, we need to kind of really articulate the difference between physical activity and physical literacy. So physical activity is movement using the body that requires energy, increases heart rate, and speeds the rate of breathing. Whereas physical literacy is having the movement vocabulary, fundamental movement skills, and the motivation, confidence, and competence to move for a lifetime. Fundamental movement skills such as hopping, running, jumping, balancing, throwing, and catching are key building blocks for being physically active throughout your life. Next slide. The activities we just went through are some examples of what is available in many resources, websites, books, and are also part of many other programs that have occurred in BC. Sort of like the leaves in the air in this photo, there are a lot of places out there where people can find resources, such as the LEAP resources, which is Food Flare, Hop and Move, Healthy Beginnings, and many municipalities and health authorities often have their own resources too. We wanted to not only update the materials from these credible sources, but also put them all in one place, sort of a one-stop shop for early years providers. But before we could determine an approach, we needed to know what early years providers wanted to know and how they wanted to receive the information. Next slide. So we surveyed and did focus groups with 269 early years practitioners across BC. We found out that they knew about various resources, but primarily went to Pinterest for ideas, activities, and games. Some of them used the resources that were developed, Hop and Leap, as I mentioned before, but many were not aware of them or had forgotten about them. They wanted something that could be easily accessed and would assist them in their work, and they said that they would be motivated to use the resource if there was training available and content was updated, refreshed on a regular basis. Next slide. So Appetite to Play launched in 2017. As I mentioned before, it's a resource for early years providers to build their capacity in promoting healthy eating and physical activity in the 0 to 5 age group. It has 5 main components: a web resource or toolkit, which Sana will go through in detail in the next section, food and physical literacy training for early years providers across the province to increase their capacity in this field, recommended practices around physical activity and healthy eating in the early years. These are consistent with the licensing requirements and standards of practice. Support and communication to early years providers and organizations about Appetite to Play and the resources, and networking amongst early years providers about healthy eating and physical activity. Next slide. Okay, so we do have a 60-second promotional video that we were going to show on the webinar, but because of technology, it doesn't show very well. So Brenda will send out the link. It's on YouTube, and so Brenda will send out the link to folks that are on the call, so that when you have time, you can have a look at the promotional video. In 60 seconds, it really provides you with a nice overview of what Appetite to Play is about. But I'll hand it over to Sana right now, and she'll walk through a bit more, provide a bit more information on the initiative.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So what we wanted to talk about was specifically the website. So Jennifer talked about how there are 5 main components for Appetite to Play, one of them being a web resource. And so the slide you see in front of you right now is a screenshot of our website. We do encourage you to check this website out and play around and explore, etc. We couldn't show it right now in our webinar just because it was getting a little bit choppy. So this is a screenshot itself. So this is our website, and it's meant to be a one-stop shop for early years providers to find information, tips, ideas, games. So very similar to those games that Jennifer was leading a few minutes ago, and activities to promote and implement healthy eating and physical activity in the early years. So as Jennifer was saying, that a lot of the early years providers that did the market research were saying that they use Pinterest as part to find ideas and games. And so we modeled our website based on Pinterest. So you can actually scroll forever and ever to find different ideas, games, activities, etc. And then you can also filter based on whether you're looking for healthy eating or physical activity posts. You can also favorite things, and yeah, so it's very interactive. The other piece around this is that early years providers told us that they're looking for very specific tools to help them organize themselves when it comes to implementing physical activity and healthy eating in their settings. So we also have a step-by-step assessment tool for early years providers, and this basically helps them figure out how they're faring against our recommended practices that were developed by our expert group in BC. The other thing is that we also have meal planners and activity planners for early years providers as well. And we also have some e-learning modules on the website too. So this website is updated on a weekly basis with new activities, games, tips, ideas, etc. And they're based on what we are hearing is important for early years providers and even from a public health perspective. So we have things on iron-rich foods, we have things on the 24-hour movement guidelines, we have things on the importance of fat in early childhood diets, and also probiotics, et cetera. So you can scroll through on your own time and check out the website. Next slide, please. The other component of Appetite to Play is our training. So we have 3 types of training, and the first one is our in-person workshop. We currently we have trained about 1,800 people across BC, early years providers across BC, in the Appetite to Play in-person workshop, and we've held about 168 workshops across the province. They are 3 hours long, and we try to make it as accessible as possible and charge about $10 per person. And this in-person workshop counts towards professional development credits for early years providers. They are delivered by 65 regional trainers across British Columbia. So the 65 regional trainers are located in different parts of British Columbia, and they deliver the local workshops to their communities. The in-person workshop is very interactive. We play a lot of games. We do in-depth information on physical literacy and food literacy. We show games, ideas, resources, and it's also an opportunity for early years providers to network and share ideas as well. Next slide, please. The other piece of training is our e-learning modules. So these are just screenshots of some pieces of our e-learning modules. They're interactive and focus on food literacy and physical literacy in the early years, and really focus on different aspects that we didn't cover in the in-person workshop. The other piece is that these e-learning modules also go in depth around the self-assessment, as well as those planning tools that I was talking about. And these are free right now on our website. Next slide, please. The one thing that we're focusing on right now is we noticed that we're having a little bit of trouble ensuring access across British Columbia. So we wanted to bring our in-person workshop into a virtual format. So we are piloting 10 sessions of virtual workshops from November 19th to March 5th. We've already held 4 workshops online, and they're 2 hours each, and they're based on GoToMeeting, so very similar to the format that you're using right now. We've created them so that they're still interactive. There's a live presenter, there's question and answer. You're still doing all the games, like playing around, jumping, et cetera, and just learning about physical literacy and food literacy. And it's the exact same content as the in-person workshop. So the reason why we're doing this is to increase access across British Columbia. And then also the reality is that people are busy, and some people prefer online training as well. So we just wanted to make sure that we have different modes of education available based on what early years providers need and want. Next slide, please. So on to successes and challenges. Next slide, please. So one of the successes that we've had is our in-person workshops. As mentioned, we have trained about 1,800 early years providers across BC. Currently, we have evaluated almost 1,200 of the pre and post surveys that all of the early years providers need to do in the in-person workshops. The attendees so far are between the ages of 15 and 75 years old. They have worked an average of 12.2 years in the field, and about 68% of everybody that attends the in-person workshop are early childhood educators, or ECEs. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to show is that this particular in-person workshop is working. We measure knowledge, confidence, motivation to change. And what I wanted to show in this slide is selected knowledge and confidence outcomes. So there's 22 indicators of knowledge and confidence in the pre and post workshop, and we've listed about 5 of them. So knowledge about physical literacy increased after the workshop. Knowledge about offering food from Canada's Food Guide increased significantly. The confidence in early years providers' ability to limit sedentary behaviors increased significantly, as well as early years providers' confidence in their ability to communicate about food and healthy eating with families. So we're finding that the knowledge and confidence is increasing significantly after these in-person workshops. Next slide, please. The other thing is that intention and the motivation to change is also increasing. So what you can see is that at least 70% agree or strongly agree that they intend or are more motivated to change outcomes. And really, if we look at this, it's more than 80%. The reason why people don't feel that they have control over healthy eating is because often parents pack lunches and snacks, etc. So often early years providers just don't have control over that. But overall, we're finding that they are motivated. They find it's enjoyable to promote physical activity and physical literacy after the workshop. They intend to limit sedentary behaviors. They're motivated as well as determined. Next slide, please. The website analytics are also very encouraging. This is for the first 11 months of Appetite to Play. We started in September 2017. In the first 11 months, we've had about 13,500 visitors. And when they come to the website for the first time, they do about 4.9 actions per visit and spend about 4 minutes and 34 seconds on the website. When they return, we have about 42% of our visitors returning. And when they do return, they're doing more on the website. They have 5.3 actions per visit, and they spend almost 6 minutes on the website. Next slide, please. This is our reach so far. The orange represents the different workshops, in-person workshops that are happening. What you can see is that it's quite sparse in the northern areas and western interior as well as Northern Island. So what we've been doing, next slide, please, is we've trained more regional trainers in different areas of BC so that they can do outreach in those areas and deliver workshops. And that's through the YMCA and the BC RPA. They've been doing an excellent job of ensuring that we have appropriate regional trainers in those areas so that we can have more in-person workshops. And the other 3 bullets indicate how we're trying to do some more outreach as well. Next slide, please. So our acknowledgements. So Appetite to Play is a huge project across the province, and we wouldn't be able to do it without all of these amazing people here. So we just wanted to acknowledge them on this slide and say thank you. Next slide, please. And thank you.
Well, and thank you, Jennifer and Sana. That's so fantastic that you've been able to engage with so many early years providers and to really build physical literacy and food literacy into these early childhood settings. So fantastic, and we've got several questions for you, but unfortunately we've run out of time. We need to get to our next presentation. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Heather McKay and Krista Hoy. Dr. Heather McKay is the Active Aging Research Team Principal Scientist and was also one of the original members of the leadership team that helped to develop the Provincial Physical Activity Strategy. She was recently inducted as a fellow into the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, one of the highest honors within Canada's academic community. Her research program investigates health promotion and chronic disease prevention strategies to enhance health at key time points. childhood, adolescence, and later life. Krista Hoy is the Program and Evaluation Manager with the Active Aging Research Team at UBC. Her background is in human kinetics, and she's driven by a desire to understand how evidence-based health promotion programs work in the real world and can be delivered at scale. I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today. And now I will turn it over to Heather, who will start us off.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for tuning into the webinar today. It's an absolute pleasure to share a little bit about our work with you. To begin, I'd just like to impress on everyone on the line that we are living in a time like no other. Longevity, where a large proportion of us are living over the age of 85 years of old, is unprecedented in the world. And with that comes lots of opportunities, but without action, it also will create a number of challenges. Next slide, please. Currently in British Columbia, currently in Canada, there are more individuals over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. And by 2051, about 25% of all Canadians will be over the age of 65. So just imagine the community within which you live. So, for example, Abbotsford being just completely composed of older adults over the age of 65. Next slide, please. Now, I probably don't have to convince anyone on the phone about the benefits of physical activity, and you've already heard a bit about this in the previous presentation, which is why it's so it's why it's so concerning that about 85% of seniors do not currently meet physical activity guidelines, which means only about 11% are in fact meeting those guidelines, and 90% of older adults are sedentary, completely sedentary, for more than 8 hours a day. Next slide, please. And you heard a little bit from Rita, and you heard from others, that should we be able to compel individuals to engage in physical activity, there are all kinds of benefits, from improving the health of your bones, to your mental health, to your brain health, increasing cardiovascular disease. The evidence is absolutely in. There is no medication more powerful than physical activity across this whole host of chronic diseases and chronic disease risk factors. Next slide, please. And Rita talked to you a little bit about active people, active places, and I was fortunate enough to be the co-lead of the physical activity leadership table when this was being designed. And from active people, active places, we were actually, the active aging research team was entrusted with coming up with an action plan, sort of to activate the strategic plan for older adults. And we did that with all kinds of stakeholders from across the province. And three central tenets of what any initiative should be arose from a series of meetings with our stakeholder groups. And they are that we should not be catering any initiative to older adults who are already physically active. We're not looking to make the marathoners more active. We're actually looking for those who are already not active. That whatever the initiative was, it should be evidence-based. And of course, we might have had some influence there, being researchers. And the last one is that it would be equitable. So we're not just interested in engaging those in urban centers across BC. We wanted to get across the entire province and be equitable across geography, but we also wanted to engage older adults across a range of mobility capacity and those who are more vulnerable. Next slide, please. So the Active Aging Research Team, in partnership with many others, launched Active Aging BC, and we were really fortunate to be entrusted by the Ministry of Health to deliver Active Aging BC across the province of BC. Next slide, please. I'm just going to be a researcher here for a second, and on this slide you will see across a continuum of descriptive studies to dissemination studies
that most of the research that is done around the world in physical activity, this is thousands and thousands of studies and thousands of papers, are mostly descriptive studies. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you take a look at, for example, the stats I just gave you about the physical activity level of older adults, and you take a look at their activity levels and you report back and describe what those physical activity levels are. But where we really need to be within communities and with these initiatives and with the research itself is at the other end of the spectrum. Krista said, I think we said at the start that we're implementation scientists, but and what that means is that we're really interested in the science of the impact of these interventions, but we're also interested in how to figure out how to disseminate them across local communities, the province, or the country in order to have a public health benefit. Only 3% of physical activity research currently resides at that dissemination end of studies. Next slide, please. Now, in dissemination trials, and as in other kinds of studies as well, work is conducted in what is called this knowledge to action cycle, shown here on this slide. And what the knowledge to action cycle is that you get together with partners, and clearly we can't do any of this without partners. Chris is going to talk more about that later. But at the very, very beginning, you get with partners and you look at designing what the intervention will be based on local needs, interest, and capacity. You implement that, you evaluate it to see what it works. If it works well, you can maybe tweak it there, and then you can disseminate it on a larger scale. And then you adapt it based on what you learn in the dissemination trial. And then you go around and around again in this constant sort of cycle of implementation, evaluation, and adaptation. So you're always meeting the specific needs of the groups that you're working with, and always, as much as possible, being effective. So, next slide, please. I'm not so good at the next slide, please part. So just in closing, and before I pass this over to Krista, I just want to tell you a little bit about the larger umbrella Active Aging BC initiative. So what are we trying to do as a group? Well, we're trying, most of all, to provide and promote opportunities for older adults across all of British Columbia to engage in physical activity opportunities. And we don't really care what that is. For some older adults, it could mean getting up out of bed and walking to the front door to the mailbox each day. To others, it could be increasing from 20 minutes of physical activity to 23 minutes of physical activity. All of these things are a huge success, depending on the range of mobility and the capacity of older people across BC. Ultimately, we want to improve the health of older people, and specifically we're looking at outcomes of mobility and social connectedness, so obviously physical and mental health. Now, mobility is really closely linked with frailty, and frailty is closely linked with living independently in your home. So we feel that if we can keep older adults mobile and living happy, quality lives in their home, we've very much achieved our goal. And finally, as I've already mentioned, our goal is to build community capacity. We absolutely cannot do this alone. People that live in local communities know the most about their communities. They are the ones that need to help us understand how we can create the fit for whatever our programs for older adults will look like in their community. And we do our best to support them through training and other resources to increase their capacity to meet the needs of older adults. And so with that, I'm going to just pass the phone over to Krista, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about one of our signature programs.
Thanks, Heather. And next slide, please. Great. So within Active Aging BC, we have two key initiatives, and none of this work would be possible without our wonderful partners. And we have three key partners, the first being the United Way of the Lower Mainland. And then for Choose to Move specifically, we have partnered with the BC Recreation and Parks Association and the YMCA of Greater Vancouver. So Choose to Move is our signature initiative, and it is an evidence and choice-based intervention that promotes the health of older adults through physical activity and social connectedness. And the real beauty of Choose to Move is that it is adaptable to both the needs of the individual and the community. Next slide, please. So to date, Choose to Move has been delivered at local recreation centers or YMCAs, and beginning this fall, we're expanding to deliver Choose to Move in partnership with non-governmental organizations and delivering in different settings as well. So Choose to Move itself is a 6-month intervention, and participants are supported over the course of 6 months in 3 different ways by an activity coach. The first method of support is called a one-on-one consultation. And in this one-on-one consultation, activity coaches guide participants in setting goals and selecting physical activities that meet their interests, abilities, and that will help them reach their goals. And activity coaches really encourage participants to set goals that are both personal and meaningful. One of my favorite examples is of a participant whose goal was to fire her housekeeper because she wanted to be strong enough to do it herself and save some money along the way. The other key piece of the one-on-one consultations is that activity coaches guide participants to choose physical activities and opportunities that are already available in their community. So guiding them to the pickleball group in town or a walking club. And then participants can also choose activities that are non-organized that they can do on their own, such as walking or gardening. There are some common examples that we see. The second method of support in Choose to Move are motivational group meetings, where groups of up to 15 participants gather to learn about health topics and share what is helping or preventing them from being active. And the sharing part is really a highlight for many participants as they're able to learn from each other. And we hear from many participants that they had no idea that others felt the same way as them. And the final method of support in Choose to Move is by way of telephone check-ins. Activity coaches call participants at various intervals and help them to troubleshoot any challenges that they face on their physical activity journey. And many of our participants report that their activity coach is like their conscience, helping to keep them on track. Next slide, please. So activity coaches really are the heart of Choose to Move. Each participant is paired with an activity coach who often has a fitness background, and our activity coaches are trained in working with seniors. Our activity coaches are truly amazing and are very invested in the success of each participant. Next slide, please. We know that one size does not fit all. So we are working in partnership with 8 NGOs to adapt Choose to Move to serve the unique needs of their community. And one example is the village of Grinnell. If you're not familiar with Grinnell, it is a small community of less than 500 people in northern BC, and over half of their population is 65 or older. So clearly what works down here in Vancouver is not going to work the same in Grinnell. So our team has partnered with the village of Grinnell to adapt Choose to Move to fit for that community. And they've done this in a few ways. First, there is no recreation facility in Grinnell, so Choose to Move is delivered at the municipal hall. Second, they've engaged a local advisory board to help tailor Choose to Move to the community's needs. And through that, they've identified a few places where they need to modify the educational content, and they've brought in some local experts, including dietitians and a nurse, to deliver some of that content. They've also been creative in their recruitment. They've partnered with a lot of local healthcare providers, including paramedics, to help recruit participants into Choose to Move. And the last adaptation that is quite unique is the activity coaches actually take participants on field trips and train them to use the local transportation services to visit a nearby community where there are a few more recreational opportunities, such as a bowling alley. Okay, so next slide, please. So what's our role in all of this? We're implementation scientists, and we know that one of the keys to any successful implementation is a central support system, and we fill that role for Choose to Move. We provide evidence of what works. We work with all of our partners, from the funders who sponsor the research, our main delivery partners that I mentioned before, communities that deliver the programs, and the older adults themselves. We bring our partners together to adapt Choose to Move and provide training where it is needed. And I can take questions on the training later if there is time. Next slide, please. So we began delivery in January 2016, and to date, we have delivered with our partners 124 programs in 50 communities and have reached over 1,000 participants. Next slide, please. And we're seeing positive results. We recently published a manuscript, our first impact paper. You can see the reference there on the bottom of the slide. And we saw increases in both physical activity and mobility and decreases in loneliness and social exclusion, or conversely, increases in social connectedness. Next slide, please. So that's our quantitative data, but with our qualitative data, we're seeing, hearing some wonderful stories that support our quantitative data. I'll pause here to let you read this quote. And stories like this are not unique. You know, we hear lots of stories from participants. Another one of my favorites is of a participant who, after participating in Choose to Move, was very excited to be able to stand up on one leg and put a sock on, something that she hadn't been able to do in years. May sound insignificant, but when you think about the impacts on her independence and quality of life, it is really quite remarkable. Next slide, please. And we see positive impacts at the participant level, but also for our activity coaches. This activity coach here talking about how delivering Choose to Move has been a really rewarding experience for her fitness career. Next slide, please. So we're continuing to expand and scale up Choose to Move, and over the next 2 years, so across 2018 and 2020, we plan to deliver with our partners over 200 programs and reach over 2,300 participants. And last slide. Great. So a couple of pieces before I formally close out. I'd encourage you to visit our website, www.choosetomove.info. If you're interested in learning how you can perhaps refer people in your area to Choose to Move, there's lots of information on our website about where upcoming programs are and contact information for registration. If you're interested in bringing Choose to Move to your community or becoming a more formal referral partner, please reach out to me and send me an email, krista.hoy@hiphealth.ca. There's also a great video on our Choose to Move website that highlights some of the experiences of our Choose to Move participants and has a link to our Facebook page if that's something that you're into as well. But I know we're running close on time here, so I will wrap it up. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Krista and Heather. And it's so interesting to hear from a scientist and researcher known for building interdisciplinary teams and that are connecting with community partners to move research findings into action. And I'll just start with a question about what are your tips for working collaborative and how do you engage community partners?
We're just here.
Heather, do you have a response for that question?
Yeah, we had just muted ourselves. Sorry, Rita, about that. That's not going to work. Yeah, I'm going to let Krista jump in here as well. But I mean, we engage them in a lot of different ways, and we rely on our partners in some cases to introduce us to other partners. So the United Way has been really instrumental through their reach across the province in identifying other organizations and other communities that are quite interested in becoming partners in what we're doing. We were also co-sponsors of a Raise the Profile seminar a year ago in Surrey, where about 250 senior service sector organizations attended. And so we were able to present to them. And although many of them are providing services to older adults, not many of them have the capacity to deliver physical activity. They weren't trained, they didn't know how, they didn't know they could, they didn't know they should. So we're in the process of engaging many of them as well, and to understand how we can sort of tweak what they're already doing to get that activity part into their offerings.
Great.
Hello?
Hi, that's fantastic. Thank you. Now I'd like to open up the question period, and we've already got a couple that are there's lots of questions that are coming in fast and furious. So we'll start with one for Appetite to Play, And Gloria wants to know whether the post surveys are done immediately after the workshop, or is there a follow-up survey that happens once those early years providers go back to their workplace?
So thanks for the question. We have, there's quite an extensive evaluation program within Appetite to Play. And so within that evaluation, Dr. PJ Naylor is heading up the research or the evaluation protocol and program. Within that, we do a pre and a post survey. So the pre is done before the workshop, the post is done after the workshop, and then we will be connecting back with early years centers in the next few months here to do more of long-term. Has there been any long-term changes? So there is plans to do that in order to see how effective long-term the workshops have been, the training has been.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. Now, Laura wants to know, how do we get involved in designing / providing some of the trainings within communities? And that one, I believe, is for Appetite to Play.
So in terms of actually delivering the workshop, like being a regional trainer, we do have trainings once every year to train regional trainers from different communities to deliver the workshop. I don't think that we're doing any. Our last one was at the beginning of November, so I think that likely we'll do one next year sometime. In terms of actually delivering a workshop or hosting a workshop in your community, definitely just email us and we will connect you with our training coordinator at the YMCA, and she'll set everything up for you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sona. I have a similar question for Choose to Move. Someone wants to know, how does one become an activity coach? And then another person wants to know how they could support bringing Choose to Move to their hometown in Kitimat, BC.
Great. Thanks. This is Krista. So questions about the training. So currently, we've just gone through a big transformation process with our training, where we have upgraded it or transformed it from an in-person full-day training to an online training with self-directed and interactive modules. And so currently, how folks become activity coaches is kind of through our delivery partners. And so our delivery partners are going out to communities and then looking for activity coaches in those spaces. But certainly, if you have more questions, just email me directly, and then we can kind of talk offline a little bit about that. Yeah, and so we've made a note there for Kitimat, and I can't recall off the top of my head whether our delivery partners have plans to be in Kitimat or not, but we could explore that for sure. And then as to your question about bringing Choose to Move to communities, it's a similar process again. So just please feel free to reach out to me by email, krista.hoyt@hiphealth.ca, and we can follow up.
Great. I have another question about physical literacy for both of you. Both are sets of panelists, and so somebody wants to know if you could expand on physical literacy in the early years and expand on what does physical literacy look like for older adults. So maybe since you're already unmuted over there at the Active Aging Research Center, if I'll let you guys go first.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to throw that back to Jennifer to talk more about physical literacy. We don't use that term as much among older adults, and we're firmly focused on physical activity, although we know that the fundamental movement skills that you learn early in life track throughout life, and it's never too late to adopt them. So it's not a fundamental part of our training, although we know it's relevant across every every point in the lifespan. But I'm going to really let Jennifer tackle that one.
Thank you, Heather. Jennifer, do you want to take a go at that question?
Sure. I think what Heather said is bang on. It's really building up the fundamental movement skills early on in order for children to have the motivation, confidence, and competence to really move across their lifetime. And when we talk about fundamental movement skills, I mentioned before, it's hopping, running, jumping, balancing, throwing, and catching. And so what you would hear PJ, if PJ was here, Dr. PJ Naylor, she would say, you know, if you teach these early on in life, how to properly throw, how to run in a way that's effective, how to support exploring hopping in different ways. So helping children to learn those fundamental movement skills early on will help them later on in their life to enjoy and feel confident and competent in physical activity. So you really set them up really with those skills early on to support them being active for a lifetime.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think we've just about run out of time, so I would like to thank our 4 panelists, Jennifer Scar, Sana Faki, Dr. Heather McKay, and Krista Hoy. Thanks so much for sharing your research and knowledge with us all today. And thanks, of course, to all of you in the audience for your attention, your thoughtfulness, and questions. We're so glad that you could join. We'll be following up with a short survey, so I hope you'll respond, as it really helps us to learn from these events what's working and what we can do better next time, and also what are some topics of interest. So please follow us on Twitter at BC Healthy Living, or under our Facebook at BCAHL, and stay tuned for more engaging knowledge translation events in the new year. Thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a healthy, active winter season. Bye now.